We've been talking about consumer choice. Okay, so why are we talking about consumer choice? Let's just do a big picture. Let's go 30,000 foot. So we're talking about microeconomics. We've looked at the issue of, scarcity and the fact that we can't have everything we want. We need to make some choices. There's an opportunity cost to those choices because the fact of the matter is choice brings with it giving one thing up in order to get something else. We've also talked about the law of supply and demand and plotting supply and demand in order to be able to kind of estimate what the price is going to be and what the quantities will be sold. We've also gone on to talk about, okay, well, if that's the case, then with supply and demand, we say, well, how is supply and demand applied in the real world? And we talked about some of the issues there that supply and demand, or the market, we'll call it, what that solves and some of the challenges it brings to the market and problems in society. And then last week we talked about elasticity and the issue of how sensitive people are to price changes in terms of, okay, the price got changed. Are you going to buy as much? Are you going to buy less? How much less? A lot less or a little bit less? So that's kind of everything we've done so far. Now we're taking all of that and we're saying, okay, so you're a consumer. You're an individual. You're going out there in the world and you recognize that there are such a thing as opportunity cost. You recognize that we have this concept of elasticity that says, our price is going to affect how much of something we buy. And what we're doing now is talking about a theory that comes from all of that. And the basic theory in terms of consumer choice says that as consumers, as rational people, we are going to do everything we can to squeeze the most out of every dollar we have to spend. In other words, we're going to maximize our utility. That's economics talk for squeezing everything we can out of every dollar we have. At this yesterday, so I'll look at it now. Melissa's marginal utility per dollar spent for apples and pears is given in the following table. How many of each kind of fruit she purchase if she can only make 9 purchases? So here we're looking at the total number of purchases. So we just simply look at this. We'll say, okay, here's our marginal utility per dollar spent. And we just glaze through them, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 18, 14, 10. So as rational consumers, we're going to want to maximize your utility. We're going to go buy, if we're going to put our hands on something first, it's going to be an apple because it has a marginal utility of 18, which is higher than all the rest. And then we'll say, well, let's go back to the pound again and say, what are we going to buy next? Well, if I look, the second apple has a marginal utility of 14. The first pear only has a marginal utility of 9. I'm buying another apple. Then I go back again and I say, what am I going to buy now? Well, a third apple has a marginal utility of 10. And first pear, only 9. So I'm buying another apple. So I bought 3 apples. Then I say, well, what's next? What's the next highest? Well, the next highest is this first pear. It's 9. It's higher than this one over here, so I'm going to buy a pear. Then I say, well, what's next? Well, 8. A second pear has 8, which is more than the 6 for the fourth apple. And in fact, the third pear has 7. And then I'm going to say, well, what? I got a choice to make. Look, I can go and the fourth apple or the fourth pear are tied, 6 and 6. So really, I'm indifferent. I can buy one or the other. So let's assume I buy this one. Well, then I make another iteration, and I say, well, I'm going to buy this one here because it, again, has the highest utility. And then finally, for my 9th item, I'm going to buy the one that has the next highest utility. I could buy a pear because it has a marginal utility per dollar spent of 5, which is higher than 2. So the total combination of items that I would buy is 5 pears and 4 apples. Any questions on that? Okay. We also have this example here that I haven't looked at yesterday. Nikki is considered buying some fruit. His total utility for apples and bananas is shown in the following table. complete the marginal utility column. So here we just going to complete these marginal utility columns. Here's an example. So let's just get our head around it first. Here's apples and the quantity of apples, 1 through 6, the total utility, and the marginal utility. And we're really asked, what is the marginal utility? Well, the marginal utility, keep in mind, is the amount of utility that changes between 1 and the next. So it went from 0 to 1. 0 to 1, 40 minus 0 is 40. Then we went from 1 to 2. 70 minus 40 is 30. Then we went from 2 to 3. 88 minus 70 is 18. 104 minus 88, 16. 118 minus 104, 14. And 130 minus 118, 12. So this is our marginal utility, which is measuring the difference between each successive one. You notice that marginal utility is declining as we go along, which makes sense because the more of a given item we have, the less valuable each successive item is in terms of pleasure. So that's apples. And we can look at bananas and do exactly the same thing. Well, from 0 to 30 is 30. From 30 to 54 is 24. From 54 to 72 is 18. 10, 8, and 5. So this is what we call the marginal amounts. And you'll notice that the marginal declines. So that was A. If Nikki has a budget of $8 and the prices of both apples and bananas is $1 each, how much will she purchase? Well, she got $8 and each one is $1. So she's going to end up purchasing 8 items. And she's going to go up here and she's going to look at the marginal utility for each item, and she's going to say which one offers the most value. Well, the first apple has a marginal utility of 40, which is higher than all the rest. So she's going to get 1 apple. That's going to be her first purchase, is an apple. Then she goes back again and says, well, what should I buy next? Well, a second apple has a marginal utility of 30, and a first banana has a marginal utility of 30. So she's indifferent. So let's assume that she buys a banana. Okay, and then she goes back again, a third item. Well, the second apple has a marginal utility of 30. She's going to buy that. Then a fourth item. Well, what's the next highest level utility? 24 versus 18, right? Because we got 2 apples already. A third apple is 18. A second banana is 24. We're going to pick 24. So the banana. Then we go back again and say, what are we going to buy next? Well, the third apple is 18. The third banana is 18. We're indifferent. We'll buy 1. And then the next go, we'll buy another. So that's 6 items we've got. Then we say, well, what are we going to buy next? Well, 16 for the fourth apple versus 10 for the fourth banana. We're going to buy an apple. 14 for a fifth apple versus 10 for a fourth banana. We're going to buy an apple. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I got all my money spent now. So effectively, I made my choice based on what gives me the maximum utility. Then it goes on to say, suppose the price of apples increased to $2. So what we do here is we say, okay, the apples were $1. So the marginal utility per dollar is we just take the 40 and divide it by 2, 30 divided by 2, 8 divided by 18 divided by 2, and so on. So we get the utility per dollar. We don't have to do anything with this because this is per dollar, right? These are exactly $1. And then we do the same thing again using the revised utility. Okay? And you could draw the demand curve for apples and demand curve for bananas. All we need to do is look at the quantity and how many we sell for each of those, and you can draw that. Any questions? Okay, here's the material for today. That first part is really critical to your understanding, okay? So very good, a lot of theory there, and you say, well, what practical difference does this make in the world? Well, looking at practical applications of this next section looks at the very thing, applications of marginal utility. And one of the first things that this theory does is it explains why our favorite things are not always our favorites. Okay, so here I got this little cartoon. I ate 1 hamburger and it tasted great. The next 2 tasted okay. I wish I hadn't eaten the 5th, and I can't finish the 6th. So what we're seeing here is a classic example of hamburgers. Someone saying, I ate so many of them that I got sick. Well, what happens? You may be a lover of hamburgers, or I may be a lover of cheesecake. And I say, okay, great. But I love one piece of it because the utility diminishes the more and more I have of a given item in a very short period of time. So even though it's my favorite item, it may not be my favorite if I've already had 3 of them. In fact, something else may become my new favorite because I'd rather have a coffee now because I've had enough cheesecake. Put that aside. So effectively what we're saying here is after consuming a certain quantity, its marginal utility per dollar spent drops to the point that other things become more attractive. So that's why we're not always walking around or living with always buying the same item. We often find that if we got enough of that item, if I've gone to the store and I've bought enough cans of Campbell's soup, I say that's enough to keep me going for a while. I don't need any more soup. I'll go buy something else. Hence, my favorite thing, Campbell's soup, might not be my favorite after I've had more than enough of them. So the theory helps explain why we might change our mind on what is our favorite. Another interesting thing that comes of this is what determines your priority in spending. And again, it just builds on that first one. And here's a classic example. It's called the diamond water paradox. And the diamond water paradox is an interesting one. Let's assume you're out in the desert and you haven't had anything to drink for 2 days. The most important thing in your world is going to be water, right? You're going to want water, water, water. That classic guy in the desert looking for water. Don't have any water. I have some diamonds. You want a diamond instead? You're probably going to say, no, I don't want a diamond. Okay? Because diamonds aren't going to keep you alive. Water keeps you alive. Diamonds don't. That's interesting. Let's assume that I've given you a glass of water now. You've been out in the desert for all that length of time. And now I say to you, you want a diamond now? And you say, yeah, I'd love a diamond now. Why did you suddenly switch your point of view? You didn't want a diamond when you were thirsty and out in the desert for 3 days. Now that you've got a drink of water, though, suddenly you're saying, I prefer diamonds over water. What happened? Okay, so this is really what the crux of this argument is all about, is that certain products have very high elasticities. Water, even though it's so essential to us and it's so valuable to us, once we've had enough of it, the value of additional water drops very, very quickly. If you needed water to live, you have a drink, you're satisfied, that's it. You don't need any more water. So the marginal utility of water is very high. In other words, let's assume that first glass of water is worth 200. The second glass of water is really more than you need, so it only has a value of 1. So it dropped really, really fast. Diamonds, on the other hand, we don't need diamonds to survive, but people like diamonds. And if you got a diamond, okay, great. Diamond would have a good utility of, say, 200. Again, then I offered you another diamond. Will the second diamond diminish in value as quickly as, say, the water did? Probably not, because the sparkling shiny of diamond is more appealing over more diamonds than water is more appealing for drinking. So certain products have high elasticities of demand, and diamonds are not as elastic in terms of once you've had one, you'd still like another one, whereas water is very elastic. So the application of this in the real world is more like to do with income, and you think about what products do you tend to buy, and generally if you're well off, you can pretty well buy whatever you want, right? So you can switch between necessity and a nice to have very easily. So nice to have stuff is valuable to you. But let's assume you have no money. If you have no money, you're only concerned about necessities. You're not interested. You wouldn't even consider nice to haves. So we've got to think about, research has consistently demonstrated that poor families spend a larger portion of their income on necessities. That's true. That is the fact. So they don't have a lot of time for fluff, we'll call it. Whereas people who are better off have their basic needs taken care of. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we do organizational behavior. Most of their needs are taken care of. So your spending priorities are going to change as your income goes up. That's the basic gist of that. Another interesting one that comes of marginal utility theory is this idea or challenge to the idea that the value of things drop. Like, for example, the first piece of cheesecake had a high value in terms of utility. Second piece, it fell off the table. It wasn't very good. But did that happen to everything? Do certain things get better with age? The more I have of it, the more I like it. And economists have looked at this, and people have came up and said, art or music, I really appreciate it. The more I hear it, the more I appreciate the sound, and the more I appreciate the music. Like this album here, for example, I have this. It's Supertramp. Now, many of you are going to say, I don't know that album. But, I look at it in the context of time. This album came out in, I'm thinking 1981. It might have been 78. But anyway, it's around 81 is when I found out about it. Okay, I know that because it was my graduation year from high school. Here you go. There's a dating for me. And I remember we were decorating the gym. And I was listening to this album. And I thought, wow, that's a cool album. The piano in it's great. And oh man, there's really some cool tunes on it, especially the Even in the Quietest Moments song, which was the W5 theme after for years, And every time I hear that album, it brings me back to high school and that sort of thing. So I appreciate it the more I hear it. Now, do I hear it extremely a lot? No, I don't have it on constant play, not at all. But I appreciate the album the more I hear it. Now, you're going to say, well, gee, Paul, that was 40 years ago. Come on now, that breaks this narrow length of time. And it does, really. It really is over a longer period of time. But I can understand the concept that certain works of art or certain things, wine, if you're a wine collector, or art on the wall or that sort of thing, or movies or these sorts of things, you could appreciate it more and more, like Ferris Bueller or Stand By Me, some of my favorite movies. I like them over time. They're still just good now as the first time I saw them. So the argument is that the law of diminishing utility really applies to purchases as opposed to, this is not really, every time I listen to Supertramp, even in the quietest moments, I didn't purchase it every time. This is just using it. So it's repeated consumption, not in the purchasing, but in the listening. So the argument is that the rule applies to purchasing only as opposed to listening or watching or seeing. But some things do improve with age. I think that's they grant that will be the case. So they kind of narrowed the rule and say only dealing with purchasing. I bought this album 3 times. I had a cassette of it, I had a CD, I had a record of it, and I had a CD of it. And if you count the fact that I got it on Spotify now, I got a Spotify of it. So, maybe I have purchased it a few times. The other thing is, should incomes be equally more distributed? And okay, this is a social argument that we're using here, and we talked about in the case of people being poor or people not having enough to live or these sorts of things. So the flip of being poor is being extremely rich. And the basic theory is that, okay, considering marginal utility theory, if I have loads and loads and loads of money, okay, $1 extra is not going to be that valuable to me. If I got $1 million and someone gives me $1, it's not going to be that much more valuable to me. Big deal. It's only $1. Whereas if I'm really, really, really poor and someone gives me $1, wow, that extra $1 is going to be very helpful. I'll appreciate it much more. So the contrarian is, if I were to take money away in form of taxes from rich people, so rich people can afford to pay more and they won't miss it because they have so much, they're not going to miss it. Whereas poor people, if you tax them, they're really going to miss it because they value their dollars more. So this is an argument that, for example, in the election past, we saw tax the rich. The NDP were saying this. And it's based on this marginal utility theory. It says if you have a lot anyway, you're not going to miss a little bit taken away from you, even though that little bit might be a great amount for someone who's poor. So, money it could be argued, has a diminishing marginal utility. The more you have, the less valuable each successive extra bit becomes. So some might argue that this is making strong grounds for advocating a more equitable distribution of income and wealth, since the gain in marginal utility by the poor would be so much greater. They'd appreciate the extra dollar so much more than the rich, because they have so much anyway. What do they need so much for? If we were to take some away from them in the form of taxes, they wouldn't miss it. So that's an interesting debate that is based on this concept of marginal utility that we're talking about here. Now, we also have this very interesting one, and I'll just finish off with that here today, and that's this idea of consumer surplus. How many times have you gone to the store and got what you consider a deal? Now, you got what you consider a deal. Wow. Why did you consider it a deal? Under what circumstances do we run into a situation where we buy things that we consider a deal? And it's really in our mind, isn't it? Because you go prepared to pay an amount of money for something. Let's assume you wanted to buy a bearing for your 1985 Big Red. Okay? And you're prepared in your mind to pay $25 for it. I'm willing to pay $25 for a bearing. I go up to the store and I find that I can buy it for $12.50. Wow. Am I pleased? Yes, because in my mind, mentally, I was prepared to pay $25. I got it for half that price. This is what's known as consumer surplus. In my mind, I have an amount in my mind that I'm willing to pay. The reality is I didn't have to pay that much. Any difference between what I was prepared to pay and what I actually paid is considered as consumer surplus. You feel really good about consumer surplus. That's what stores try to do. Why does Costco, Walmart try to give prices or put stuff out in the center aisle or put stuff on the way into Costco that they know people would like to buy, and put it at a price where people feel they're getting a bargain? And that makes them feel good when they enter the store or when they walk through the main aisle of the store, and they know that they'll spend more if they feel good. So using this concept of consumer surplus, stores use it in marketing in order to encourage more purchasing. So the basic concept of consumer surplus says that the marginal consumer surplus is the difference between the dollar marginal utility of the unit and the price you paid. In other words, this is how much you're willing to spend. This is what you actually spend. If there's a gap, that's consumer surplus. And so you can see here in this little example, consumers, and this is chunks of consumers, they would have been willing to pay. This is what they actually paid. So whatever they actually paid less, whatever they would have paid less what they actually paid is consumer surplus. So we can measure consumer surplus for society as a whole. And there's been lots of studies done, for example, Walmart, and they estimate that because Walmart has these prices, it saves consumers about $300 to $400 a year based on standard products. And Walmart's full aware of that. And this is what they target their marketing on, is the fact that our low prices give you an opportunity to spend your money somewhere else and save on the necessities that they sell. So the consumer surplus is a very critical one that stores often apply whenever they're into marketing products and services.
You are currently the only person in this conference. Good morning.
Good morning. Get my A's in. Please.
Did you see my message?
Yes, thank you. I had set them up yesterday, and anyway, when you set them up, it's easy to make that mistake. Oh well.
I wondered why I didn't see anything on the schedule this morning.
Yeah, so, I always do it. And anyway, so it's 9 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, I said I've not seen Paul tonight, that's for sure.
Oh well, no. I have an exam tonight from 7 to 9, so. Oh, exam time! Don't you love exam time? So, how are you making it with any preparations and the like?
We got one this afternoon. When do we have microeconomics again?
Wednesday.
We got another one on that day too?
Yeah, now October 21st. When's October 21st? 19th, 20th, 21st. 19th?
Thursday.
Yeah, 21st. I put it up in the course. It's in the news when it is.
Yeah, we got an accounting midterm as well that day.
In the evening or not? Because all my exams seem to have been put to the evening.
I'm not sure. Hang on. As in the morning, 8:30 to 10:30.
Yeah. Seems like Dee and I got exams shoved to the evening. I'm not altogether clear on why that's the case. Anyway, as long as it works for you guys, that's the trick. I'm sure there might be some rationale that I don't know about. I don't see the big picture anymore. You see, I'm just doing a course.
I think what it has to do with is, do you have any students in your class that are outside of the Colombo campus?
That might be the case, and I think you're right there.
Yeah.
I think that's the case, but Christopher, I'm not altogether sure because I'm not. They don't come to this session, so I'm not sure. Anyway, regardless, we're here, and the important thing is that the exam for this course comes up on the 21st. Here is the plan now of what we're going to do today and Wednesday in preparation for that. Today, I just wanted to finish off in the first half hour or so. I'm going to finish off the chapter that we're doing on customer demand. Okay, we're going to look at that. I got one final piece plus a question at the end that we're going to take a look at. Once we're done with that, then I'm going to do a review of the material we have covered so far to date. I don't know if I'll make it all the way through that review, in which case that will flip over to Wednesday. And on Thursday, I'm going to say Wednesday and Thursday because I'm hoping, on Wednesday and Thursday will be an opportunity, because we do have the exam in the night, will be an opportunity for you guys to study, but also to ask any questions if there are any questions. I will not be covering any new material once I'm done with this bit here this morning. I will not be covering any more new material, just reviewing basically for the midterm and taking questions on it. Okay, so that's the plan forward for this week. Now, let's see where we are. Let's just get the okay, so we're dealing with this subject of consumer choice, and I think we've done a couple reviews on this material so far. So effectively, all consumer choice is a psychology chapter. It's dealing with people's decision making with regards to products that they buy, and that rational decision. In other words, we make a concerted effort towards making that choice. That rational decision generates for us something called utility. In other words, the amount of pleasure or the amount of use we get out of something. In economics, we measure that utility with something called utils. And utils is just an arbitrary measurement of the amount of use that something gets. It's not standardized by any stretch of imagination. However, it is relative, and we're looking at one product relative to another. How much pleasure do you get out of this product versus that product? So the bulk of the material that we've talked about in this course has dealt with this idea of, first of all, measuring the utility, and second of all, comparing a couple or three. You could have any number of products, but practically it's a couple or three products, and assessing them for the amount of utility and saying, okay, what order would we buy them in if we had a certain amount of resources? But so we looked at that. And so in terms of utility, we saw a couple of things. We saw, first of all, the basic assumptions. And as I say, it assumes that the consumer is rational. It assumes that our major objective is to get the most out of anything, customer satisfaction, maximum utility. It assumes that we got a relatively short period of time. We're not dealing with an infinite period of time here. In order to understand this concept, we're looking at more like minutes rather than days or weeks or months. We're looking at a relatively short period of time. And sometimes we can purchase these things in sets. That means we could buy, like a vacation would include a number of products, a trip, a hotel, and that sort of thing thrown in together. We looked at this idea of measuring utility. And in the measurement of utility, we have to understand total utility and marginal utility. Total utility is the total amount of pleasure you get out of something, considering that you buy several of them. So the first item, for example, that you buy, if you buy one, will have a certain amount of utility. And this utility is known as the marginal utility, which is the amount of extra utility you get out of it. Obviously, in the first item you buy, the amount of extra is the total. It matches the total because you only have had one. But if you were to buy two, you'd have an amount of extra utility out of the second one, and that would give you a total which would include the value of the first one plus the value of the second one. And the third one would be the value of the third one plus, for total, it would be plus the values of the previous ones. So the key takeaway from this section is to say that, look, if we look at utility, we're noticing a couple things. Marginal utility declines as we buy more. And that only makes sense because as we are satisfied, as our needs are satisfied, each successive one, really, we're happy. Now we've had enough to drink, we've had enough to eat, we've had enough skiing, we've had enough, getting more is probably not as valuable. So what happens is marginal utility declines as we use more and more of a successive product. The other thing we need to know is our total utility, even though our marginal utility is declining, our total utility goes up to the point that marginal utility goes negative. In other words, we are disgusted by it, and our total utility will start to drop then because we're being forced. So you can see here in this particular example that marginal utility is declining right through, and we can see total utility is increasing right through to the point that our marginal utility becomes negative. In other words, we get sick of the whatever we're eating or whatever we're doing. So our total utility goes down. We've had too much of a good thing, more or less. We can plot these utilities. We can see it on a graph. Here's our total utility. You can see how it rises. It rises at a decreasing rate because the fact is that marginal utility is declining. It peaks and it could theoretically drop off. And we see marginal utility is always downward sloping. So it's always downward sloping because, again, as we buy more of a given product, each successive one is less valuable to us. So I went through some examples there of cheesecake, for example, and looked at this idea of how utility drops. Okay, so that was the first thing we looked at. The second thing we looked at was the optimal purchasing rule. And all the optimal purchasing rule really does is it compares a couple or three items, and it says, let's look at the order of which we would buy them, assuming that we buy them one at a time, okay? And essentially what it is we're going to buy the one that gives us the most value or the most utility. So whenever we look at something, then we have to compare which one has the most value. So if we look at this very simple one here, the maximum value comes out of that first cup of coffee, $250. Once we've had the first cup of coffee, then we have to move to our second cup of coffee or our first piece of cheesecake in the case of the alternative. We see our second cup of coffee still has a higher utility than our first piece of cheesecake, so we're going to buy that. So effectively, given us a certain amount of money and a certain amount of resources, we would buy it in the order of declining its marginal utility as we go along, but in a way that would maximize our overall total utility. In other words, we'd buy the highest value one first, the second highest value one second, the third highest value one third, and so on. So we see that. And this works very easily if the prices of the products are the same. It's a very simple process. However, when the prices differ, for example, a $5 piece of cheesecake and a $4 coffee, what we need to do in order to be able to make that comparison now is we need to look at the marginal utility per dollar. So we need to do a little conversion on it so that we take, for example, a piece of cheesecake that costs $5, it gives 200 utils. So if we divide that by 5, we can find out the utility per dollar, or 40 units per dollar, or 40 utils per dollar. And we could do the same thing with the coffee here. We take the utility and we say, here's the total amount. The cup of coffee costs us $4, so the utility per dollar then is $62.50. Then we can make our comparison the same way we did it before, where we look at the highest utility, then the second highest, the third highest, and so on in order to make our decisions. Now, this optimal purchasing rule is a theoretical, okay? But it demonstrates the fact that we as consumers tend to buy things in a rational way so that we buy things that are most valuable to us each time we go to buy. We are always making decisions, and the decision really gives us items that are most valuable so we can tell our preferences. And everyone's preferences are going to be different. Okay, so that's the optimal purchasing rule. We took a look at that. We saw how that works, and we said, okay, we understand that theory. Then we looked at some applications, some practical applications, because as I say, this chapter is very theoretical. So what are some of the practical applications? Well, the first practical application is that we understand the psychology, or because of this, we understand the psychology that even though you might say something is your favorite, that can change over time because as you get more and more of your favorite, the less valuable that item becomes. So it's no longer your favorite. You know, cheesecake might be my favorite, but as I've had 3 pieces of cheesecake, now I'm going to switch to something else because really I've had more than enough cheesecake. So we can see that as we consume things, our favor, or what we define as our favorite, may change. Because if I could say that owning Skidooey Lands was my favorite, but I have 4 of them, I'm going to say I got a garage full and now they're in my way. It's not my favorite anymore. I'm not going to buy any more of those, right? True story. We also run into this idea of a practical application of this to say that because of utility, we can think about, well, what is our priority as we spend things, okay? As we spend things. Certain things will have a greater drop-off in utility as we use them. For example, water is very, very valuable. It's essential for life. But once you get your glass of water and you've quenched your thirst, water is no longer any valuable to you because you've had enough. Okay? So water declines in value very quickly. The marginal utility drops very steeply. Diamonds, on the other hand, even though they may not have as much of a practical value, they're rare and they have some use and they look pretty and these sorts of things. One diamond might have a high utility, but a second diamond will still have a very high utility because the utility doesn't drop as quickly as it does with water. And this is known as the diamond water paradox out there in economic speak. But effectively, what it says to us is not all things drop in value in terms of their degree of utility as fast as other things. And that's certainly going to have an impact on how we spend our money. So that our priorities, as we already know in the first case, our priorities shift as we get more and more of a given thing. So what's really going to affect our priorities is really going to be determined by how much marginal utility there is in each successive purchase of a given product. We also tackle the issue of do things decline? Do all utilities decline? You know, we've talked so far about how utility declines as we get more and more of a given item. And the argument out there in the world has been that, you know, certain things such as art or music don't really decline because we enjoy it as much or more the more we listen to it or the more we look at it. The argument that economists use is that, okay, yeah, fair enough, that's true. The value of those things might continue, but they're not purchases. We only purchase it once, and we enjoy it as we move along. What we're talking about with the law of marginal utility and this law of diminishing marginal utility in particular are successive purchases. So even though you might like Even in the Quietest Moments as an album, if you bought 6 of those albums, really one album is enough to listen to. What's the point of 5 more? And what's the point of 6 more or 10 more or 20 more? So the purchasing of the item may not be valuable, even though you might enjoy the contents of it as much. The other thing that is often thrown up, and probably the one that is most common in terms of this concept of marginal utility, is taxation and government's rationale for taxing the rich. Okay, and the basic thing is that people who are very well off have most of their needs already met. Their food, water, companionship, all of the things that Mr. Abraham Maslow talked about in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of those things are pretty well met for someone who has a lot of financial resources. And the theory goes that if they have so much, they're not going to miss some of it taken away because they have so much to start with. So the thought is we can easily tax the rich because they won't miss the taxed money as much as someone who's poor. So the thought is if we could tax the rich, it will have less of a harmful effect on those individuals as it would of taxing the poor. The poor, where they don't have a lot to start with, if you tax them, you know, it's really going to be hard on them. So government policies across the world generally have had what we call progressive taxation systems. So if we look at income tax in Canada, for example, the more money you make, the greater tax you pay, not only in a relative proportion, but in percentage-wise. So as you make more money in Canada, your rate that you pay tax goes up. You end up in another tax bracket. We heard tell the term tax bracket. In other words, people who have lots and lots of money pay proportionally higher taxes. Say 30 to 50% of their income is taxed, whereas people in the poorer spectrum, probably 5 to 10% of their income is taxed. And the marginal utility theory helps explain why governments can do that, or explains to governments why they should be allowed to do that. And the fact is that rich people just won't miss the money. That's the bottom line in terms of the basic concept. Okay, we finished off with this concept of customer surplus and or consumer surplus. And consumer surplus is just people feel like they're getting a deal. Okay, so if you're prepared to pay something for something, you know, if I want a glass of water, okay, I want a glass of water, and I'm really thirsty, it's really hot, I'm prepared to pay $2 for a bottle of water. But what if someone handed me the water for free? Wow, I would really value that. I'm really thirsty. Someone's giving me a bottle of water for free. I would have paid $2 for it. The difference between what I would have paid and what I actually got it for is known as consumer surplus. And the idea is that consumer surplus makes people feel good because they feel that the utility they get is much greater than the amount of money they spent on the product. And that only makes sense when you think about it. You know, if you feel you got a good deal and you got good value out of a product, great. Other things we buy are cheap. Okay, if I go to the dollar store, I'll buy something that's cheap. Maybe I feel like I got a good deal because I didn't pay very much. But if I ask myself, how long did it last? Or how much value did I get out of it as I used it? I might ask that question and come up with an answer that I don't like. That is, gee, I spent $5 on it, but I didn't get any use out of it. If I spent $25 on it, I would have got a lot of use out of it. I would have bought a better quality item that I would have got a lot of use out of. So whenever we think of products, we got to ask ourselves, are we getting value for money out of it? And consumer surplus is really just measuring that value for money. So you can see here that there is a gap between what people would have paid and what people actually paid. The difference between the two is known as consumer surplus. And we could do it for society as a whole if we add up all of the consumer surpluses of individuals, and we could get this. Now, Walmart trades on this concept in terms of their advertising because they say that they save, on average, their statement is, they save Canadians about $300 a year on basic items. And they're right, they do. And this is part of the reason, is that they can buy in such huge quantities in bulk in China, and all these sorts of things allow them to charge lower prices. They got a very good distribution system too. So this is what the major appeal and the success of Walmart has come from, and that is giving good value for money. And normally stores that can provide this sense of consumer surplus to people will do very well. Amazon, for example, has mastered it. The online shopping experience, in COVID in particular, I mean, why would I go to a store and buy something when I can buy something online with the click of a mouse and someone will deliver it right to my door? That's ultra convenient. There's a huge amount of consumer surplus to that. Okay. The last thing that is in this chapter, and it's not a critical thing, but it is important that you understand the basic concept. And I get caught up in the math of it as much as I will the basic concept of it, okay? The last thing is known as price discrimination. And price discrimination, even though it has a negative connotation, it really means that you give some sort of a different pricing arrangement to some sort of specific customer. Students, seniors, people who live in a certain area. So price discrimination means that the same basic product with the same basic cost of production is being sold to different consumers at different prices. Now, on the surface, that might sound unethical, but stores have done this. You know, you get a better deal if you shop in, students get a better deal if you shop in Sobeys on Tuesday. I think there's a 10% discount or something along those lines. You know, people who are members of a certain club, I don't know what it is, something, some credit card, will give you a 2% discount. These things are forms of price discrimination. They only work if we can identify the groups that we're trying to target, okay? Let's say, for example, seniors discount. How do you define a senior? 65 and above, 55 and above, whatever it is, but it can be done. So you can clearly identify the group, okay? Or how can you identify a student? Again, student card, clearly identified, easily done. People who are from a certain ethnic background, very difficult to do. So you very seldom see price discrimination on the basis of that. Usually it's on the basis of age or some involvement in some organization or school or the like. You got to be able to separate them from one another, so they have to be defined. And you got to be able to assure that they can't resell the product. We wouldn't want seniors, for example, buying products at 10% discount and then resell them. And the seller has to have some degree of control over the price, obviously. Normally, price discrimination is practiced on the basis of age, gender, time of purchase. You know, for example, you buy a snowblower in the middle of the summer, and you'll get a better deal than if you buy it in the middle of winter. Time of use, telephones. When I was growing up, I don't know if any of you remember, but it used to be after 6 o'clock at night, long distance telephone fees were lower. I don't know if that's the case anymore. I don't make enough long distance phone calls anymore, but the fact of the matter is that it was a form back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, of a form of price discrimination. And the reason is that the system had to be built. The rationale of the phone company was the system had to be built for the daytime, which is when business used the phone. They weren't using it in the night, so all that system was sitting there idle. So in order to encourage people to shift their purchasing to the evening, when the system had lots of capacity, they lowered the price in the evening. And the volume of purchases, we've all seen volume discounts. The more you buy, the lower per unit cost. So these are all forms of price discrimination. and it allows the consumer to get more value or utility out of the product by adjusting the price for a given group of customers. We can see here's a little example of the mechanics of it. I'll call it more of the mechanics. So here we got the following table shows the demand for haircuts on an average weekday in your hairdressing salon. Investigation in the market has revealed that that the demand for seniors differs greatly from the demand for other customers. So if you look at the various prices for haircuts, right, they run from $20 to $8. The quantity demanded by seniors and the quantity demanded by regular customers. Now you'll notice that seniors are very, very price conscious. So if you look at the $20 haircut, only one senior will get the haircut. 18, 4, 16, 7, 14, 10, 12, 13, 10, 16, 8, 19. Over on the right, I've done the math on it to calculate the revenue that would come to the store based on the seniors going to get the haircut. So at a price of 20, one will get a haircut, the revenue will be $20. And you can see 18, a price of 18 will give a revenue of $72. Price of 16, $112, 14, $140, 12, $156, 10, $160, and 8, $152. So you can see, if we're the hair cutting shop, if we're the place that's doing the cutting, we'd ask ourselves, well, what would be the best price to charge a senior in order to maximize our revenue? So if we look at maximizing revenue in the green there, a price of $10 would get the most seniors in the door, and that would give us a maximum revenue of $160. Okay, so seniors, $10 is a good price for them in order to maximize our revenue from seniors. Other customers, on the other hand, if you look at other customers, the price of $20 brings in 9 customers, 18, 10 customers, 16, 11, 14, 12, 12, 13, 10, 14, 8, 15. So as you can see, same thing, as the price goes down, more customers walk in the door. And we ask ourselves, well, what pricing level will give us the highest revenue, okay? So at $20, 9 customers will come in at $180 in revenue. And if you make the price 18, 10 customers come in at 180. So, I'd want to maximize my revenue on the fewest number of customers, so I'm going to pick $20 and say that $180 is going to be my maximum revenue at a $20 charge, okay? So if I'm the store, and if I look at question B, I'll do this backwards. Look at B. Suppose you charge seniors a different price than you charge the consumers. What prices would you charge either group in order to maximize my sales revenue? Well, to maximize my sales revenue, I would look at this and say, well, at $10, seniors give us the highest revenue, $160. At $20, regular other non-seniors will come in and give us the maximum revenue of $180. So the price I would give seniors then would be basically a half price. Seniors, half price. That would maximize my total revenue, 160 plus 180. So that would be $340. Okay. In A, if you could only charge one price to all customers, which price would give you the greatest sales revenue? Well, if you look at the one price, you can see that the highest revenue comes in at, or the one price that yields the highest revenue is a price of 12. 12 will give $156, and in both cases, it will give $156 revenue. You'll notice that revenue, okay, $312, total revenue, 156 plus 156, is less than the revenue you will get if you charge differential pricing. So obviously, stores look at this sort of thing. They do this type of analysis, and they say, is it worth giving a sales discount or a discount to seniors? And in this particular case, using these particular numbers, yes, it is. Any questions on that?